going? Good. I'm glad we've had this talk. Get arranged. Man, 25 years of small groups. I think, Pastor Jason, that impact, it's not a hyperbole when he says we believe that you've had more impact than we've been able to. It's different style. We're able to speak to large groups, and we get to lead organization and things like that. But the one-on-one, any older minister who's been through it, even the ones who have been more hype related, and I say that kindly, not meanly, will tell you that it's the one-on-one connection, the growing people through relationships, what we call discipleship, that has made the most impact. There's a point at which, I don't know, I believe you're going to agree with me, Pastor Jason, and I won't keep mentioning you so you don't have to keep staring at me the whole time. But there's a point that you begin ministry and you think that your impact is because you're going to share what God has given you and things like that. And there's a point at which you realize, or you start wondering, does this, what I'm getting ready to do, even matter? And you have to have different points of view where you go, oh, it's micro changes and changes over periods of time. And this also is what small groups do, because I promise you that these small group leaders, whether you've been doing it 25 years or one or whatever, you're going, does this even matter? I'm really tired, maybe we should cancel, and these different things. Or, I don't know, the whole world shuts down. We should shut down too. And to have the type of vision that says we're going to push through and we're going to solve things. And I know Bob and Bib more closely than many others, but it's not like they were like, we really want to know technology. I promise you that was not the motivation. Am I correct, Bob? Yep. Good. But they solve it. And not to also make Bib uncomfortable, but I would, and I'm going to, I would love it, and I mean this genuinely, if you simply found a way to glue or something that back together. And my personal reason is why I don't go to your group. I've shown up for 4 years and worked in the same office as Bib. And we're all broken in some way. I, in particular, was wondering if I would ever do ministry again, and whether I wanted to. I still had a sense of God's call, but Bib, I'll verb this, mommed me. Gentle and direct, kind, patient, and from almost the first day that she learned that, oh, I've been a pastor, she was like, oh, no, you are. I didn't want to hear that because a bunch of reasons. I'm not trying to go on. I've got a lot to talk about today. But I think the broken back together, really for all the groups. I'm not endorsing go smash your plaques. But I think the broken back together, at least for me and some of the people I know in the groups, is an incredible representation of the life that you guys, and the way you're impacting lives. So anyway, enough of that sappy stuff. Let's get on to some more. We are still in James. We're going to be in James. Suck it up. Pastor Raphael can run 13.1 miles. We can make it through James by sitting in pews. All right? And it's significant. It's good stuff. Pastor Jason talked about anger that James is talking about, and that this can't be, my summary is it just can't, the negative version of it can't be the controlling element in your life. And the importance of how we react to things is absolutely vital. So as we go on, I think I mentioned it before, but I want to really point out, at least for someone like me who is a context person, I want to know how it fits. We're going to do that today again. But there are just verses that in James that, for me, as I read the Bible, it's a unique thing. And I mentioned this, I think, last time, and maybe every time, but I think it's important. When you go into Proverbs, for example, you can pull verses out because they're broken up. Most of them are not meant to be read together. They're meant to be short little encouragements and challenges and things like that. Most of the Bible, though, isn't like that. It's not that you can't pull this verse out, but it's more important that first you understand how that verse fits. And once you understand where it fits, you can then pull it out and kind of look at it and work on it. It would be, you can't just go into an engine and decide, I'm going to remove the pistons. Now all you have are pistons. But if you're like, well, and if you were, the only way they make sense is that you refer to the structure that they belong in. Yeah? This is context. James is interesting because you can do the context thing, but you can also do the Proverbs thing where you can often just take a verse out and go, this is really, really important. Part of the verse we're going to read today begins with, don't just listen to God's word, do what it says. You can pull that out, paste it on something, and it'll mean exactly that, even with context and without context. And so this thing that James is able to do here is really, really remarkable, and now you've all just have changed lives because I explained that to you, I know. But what Pastor Jason was talking about last week integrates naturally into what James is saying, what I think he's saying through the entire chapter. Why he begins with, count it all joy when you encounter diverse trials. And you're like, what? That doesn't make sense. Summary is, hey, be happy when things are really hard. That's nonsensical if we just leave it at that. But when we get what James is saying, when we understand the culture that he's writing to, it starts to make sense. Today, our summary is going to be, how should we act when we feel like, or when we are in fact being attacked? And we know that there's a difference, right? There can be a difference between when we feel like we're being attacked and when we are being attacked. I got one yeah. Sometimes when I don't get a yeah or something, I feel like I have to stay there to bring you along. I thought that was, I don't know. Sometimes I feel threatened when in fact I'm not. And in those cases, I actually often need a friend or a leader or someone to come in and say, hey, this is what they're actually saying. And as a hopefully maturing person, I go, oh, I'm sorry. And I redirect because sometimes my natural is, what? And I need someone else to say, they're not attacking you. Calm down. You're 54 and overweight. You got 30 seconds of cardio in you. You're not going to win this. But boy, my brain's convinced it can go. That's it. That's what we're going to talk about. What do we do? What does James challenge us to do? It's less of a, here's what to do in every case, and more honestly, of what not to do. So let's start. James 1, 22 through 27. But don't just listen to God's word. You must do what it says. Otherwise, you are only fooling yourselves. For if you listen to the word and don't obey, it's like glancing at your face in a mirror. You see yourself, walk away, and forget what you look like. But if you look carefully into the perfect law that sets you free, and if you do what it says, and if you don't forget what you've heard, then God will bless you for doing it. Verse 26, if you claim to be religious, I'll pause there and say, we have in our circles this thing, I'm not religious or whatever it is. Throw all that out, just accept if you claim to be someone who is trying to be faithful to God. Yeah? Okay, good. If you claim to be religious, someone being faithful to God, but don't control your tongue, you're fooling yourself and your religion is worthless. pure and genuine religion in the sight of God, the Father, means caring for orphans and widows in their distress and refusing to let the world corrupt you. I have 3 grandsons, 11, 6, and 4, something like that. That's not my job in my relationship to remember things like that. I know their names. I can even differentiate them when they show up at the same time. I feel like I'm winning, okay? Anyway, my 4-year-old, the 4-year-old one, they're all strong-willed too. They get it from their mom and from Angie, not me. I have been gentle and kind and wonderful since day one. Anyway, but the 4-year-old, he 2 older brothers, and so from time to time, a toy will be taken or bumped or pushed or something like that, and he has a tendency to take a swing, meaning punch, all right? Slap, make noise, act like a 4-year-old. Side note, he's not immature, he's 4. That's a whole different thing, different message. His parents then, when it's relevant, sometimes kids are kids, but when it's relevant, particularly an issue, they work to calm him down. They do a new thing that I'm hearing about, which is redirection. Apparently, you're not supposed to just say, shut up. Oh, I'm sorry, it's church. Be quiet, angrily. But they redirect, and it's just beautiful. And they teach him about self-control. And we call that good parenting. Yeah? Another story for you. A former UFC fighter, he was a heavyweight champion, actually, named Cain Velasquez, was sentenced to 5 years in prison a few years ago for attempted murder, felony assault, and gun charges. It seems that he found the man he was looking for and began shooting at him without regard for any people around or anything else other than trying to kill this man. Now, some of you may know the story, but for those of you who don't, which is probably the most of you, think about how you feel about that. Is that action okay? Let me add some more to the story now. Cain had just found out that his son had been sexually abused by the man he was trying to shoot. Does the new information change your feelings about Cain's actions? Probably. Let's set aside, we'll come back randomly to that. Because how we respond to even terrible things is pretty important. So if we're looking at the context, to jump back into this context conversation, we're looking at the context for James and the people he's writing to. He's writing to Jewish Christians, people who had been Jews, had heard the gospel, and decided to be Jesus followers, okay? They are scattered really throughout the Roman Empire, so this letter is going out to multiple places, but they are all experiencing similar pressures, similar tensions, similar things that are coming against them, and not just soft things, but genuinely hard things, hard enough that as a community there was an identification, that there was the identification of as children of Abraham and Jews and Hebrews, but also the same pressures helped identify us too, right? And so among the general pressure of that time was what I'm summarizing as a belief that evil was winning. For them, Roman soldiers were everywhere, and their job was to enforce subjugation and to make sure there weren't any riots or rebellions or anything going on. Jewish religious expression then was sometimes suppressed and in some cases even controlled politically. There's way more on that, but it is a fact. So if you're curious, we can talk about it. Another pressure was the idea that things aren't fair. Or right along with this is the idea that we need justice and we need it now. There was heavy taxation. The tax rates for the average person were upwards of 30 to 40%. If you're curious that you need something to put it against the average U.S. citizen, right now, and this includes the top 1%, so it actually kind of skews the real number, but for the average is right now 29.2% for us. They're also, in this, things weren't fair, and we need justice, a societal exploitation of the poor by the wealthy. We've never seen that, yeah? Additional pressures just for these Jewish Christians, where this type of question would be, why aren't things better? Where is God? Our whole land was invaded years ago, and now we're dealing with all this extra stuff. Where is God, and why is he not responding to this evil? The idea that we're children of Abraham. Additionally, as Jewish Christians, we are people who have found the Messiah. And Messiah is supposed to fix this. We used to be great, and Jesus is supposed to make us great again. And then finally, and this isn't exhaustive, it's just kind of summing up some ideas that I think are relevant, is the idea of who's telling the truth. Who's telling us the truth? Almost many of the letters in the New Testament, one of the big sections that the writers are saying, pay attention, pay attention, pay attention, and it's against false prophets. Paul, a different writer, but mentioned them as they come with a different gospel. One that isn't bringing hope, and one that is trying to enslave you again. For Peter, it's false prophets whose evil is equal to that of Sodom and Gomorrah. I mean, they're not going soft on this, because it's creating an environment where people have been told the gospel and another one's coming in and preaching something else with the same, but with mock authority, as if they know, and is contradicting what they thought was true. And now they're left, because they're not scholars, they're not the apostles who have the authority. Instead, they've received a message, and they're a little separated. Who's telling the truth? Which way are we supposed to go? And so they're left with, how do we respond to these things? If we're doing somewhat of a kind of a big context lesson here for a few minutes, when Jesus was alive, and even after, during this period of time that James is writing, there were some major versions. We have the majority of people who just live, right? They just get up in the morning, they're figuring out, how are we going to eat today? How are we going to survive? How are we going to make it? Hopefully no one is attacking me, because I don't know how I would survive that. That's the majority. But apart from that, you got four other kind of unified or the groups that kind of came together and identified in certain ways. And so one of them was the Sadducees. And so their response to the Romans coming in was, well, we're rich and in power. We don't want to stop being rich and in power, so we're going to agree. And so they team up with the Romans. That's one of the ways many, honestly, Christians today have responded to many different things, maybe even some of us. The next group that you've heard of is the Pharisees. This is the one that Jesus really rips on. Let me give you a shocking idea. The Pharisees weren't that bad. They were just wrong. And out of any group in the Bible, the majority of us, our church, you and I sitting here, if there was a group that you and I would be, that the metaphor works, it's Pharisees. Not in just there's the easy metaphor, the Pharisees are legalistic. Are we legalistic? Listen, we certainly have been. If you don't know that, you haven't been in church long enough. Right? We're more liberal now in these things than we've ever been, and I don't mean that negatively. I mean, we stop I don't know, there's a bunch. Anyway, I don't have time. But Pharisees, they are doing some stuff wrong. Their version, their theology, their point of view on God isolated the people who needed to hear about hope. If you were in, then you could do this. You remember the tax rates? This is before tithe. And for us, if you don't tithe here, if you don't give 10%, keep coming. It's not a requirement. It's a whole different thing. I'm not going to go into it because I don't want to throw anyone or mess anyone up. I'm just telling you that this isn't a thing. But for them, for Jews, if you're not tithing, you can't participate. So if you can't give up, right around 50% of your income, because you have to pay taxes. But unless you can pay the extra, and not just tithe, but every other offering to be a part of the community, you're not in. And so this is some of what Jesus is pushing against. Another version of response were called the Essenes. And have you ever heard the Dead Sea Scrolls? We think that that's where those scrolls were hidden, ended up being placed, and that was that group that saved up some of those writings. And their response to Roman occupation and everything that was evil was to completely withdraw. So, and they created a very, very, I'm going to go with the word legalistic, but very follow the rules 100% culture or community. But so the response was separate and then do everything right, because we have to be the people of God. We can see the motivation is right, but maybe the execution, hard to say everybody should live that way. Finally, and the one we're going to hit on a little more today, or you'll get the feel of it today, were the zealots. And it's this, how should they respond? The two that I'm going to point out are the revolutionary model. And the Bible term for this is zealot. And the zealots advocated armed resistance against the Roman rule. Right? It's, well, they're here, let's kill them. Let's wipe them out. Matter of fact, to this degree, if we don't, we are not being faithful to God. The Romans being here, if I'm that person, is a violation. This is God's land given to God's people, and these are not God's people. They cannot dwell in God's land. To be faithful, we have to wipe them out, run them out. They cannot exist here. They rejected Roman authority and sought to kick them out. This ended up not being the best probable response, because this led to a rebellion that resulted in the destruction of Jerusalem and the Second Temple in 7 AD, or 7 of the Common Era, the year 7D. That's what I'm trying to say, 7-0. Now, there's one other response that we're going to know some about, and I'm going to call it the way of Jesus. So remember all these tensions. Matthew 5:11. We did a whole series on Jesus talking about the Beatitudes, going through the blessed are's. Blessed are those, right? For they shall see God. And this is one of the chunks right after what we call the Beatitudes of Jesus says, God blesses you when people mock you and persecute you and lie about you and say all sorts of evil things against you because you are my followers. Verse 12, be happy about it. Be very glad, for a great reward awaits you in heaven. And remember the ancient prophets were persecuted in the same way. It's great to have what you ought to do. And this is, I think it's more than what you ought to do, but that's what it feels like. If you come up and punch me, I might react. It's not a threat. That's, for most of us, would be the reasonable response. And yet Jesus has an opposite response. Turn the other cheek. That doesn't happen naturally, guys. It happens when we're intentional, when we're aware, when we are submersing ourselves inside this gospel that Jesus is talking about. So back to James, back to what James is talking about. We have all this. I'm asking you to kind of hold all that, not in detail, but just know that there are all these tensions and things that are being put up there. And there are these responses that I think for James are the two that he's comparing right now. Are the zealot. If we're going to be people of God, then we have to be righteous and fight. And if you don't fight, you're not righteous. And we have Jesus saying, no, you're blessed when people mock and persecute you. Be happy. Your reward's great. And we're going to struggle with that because it's certainly not American. Yeah. James 1:22. Let's get into this. 3 points, I think he says, begins with do what it says. It says, but don't just listen to God's word. You must do what it says. Otherwise, you're only fooling yourselves. For if you listen to the word and don't obey, it's like glancing at your face in a mirror. You see yourself, walk away, and forget what you look like. But if you carefully look into the perfect law that sets you free, and if you do what it says and don't forget what you heard, then God blesses you for doing it. Some quick explanation, mirror and forget. It seems like a weird thing. You feel like he's saying that also then the Bible is a mirror and stuff, but he's not. He's simply saying something absurd. He's trying to say, look, if you read the Bible, if you think you're allowing it to come in and transform you, but then your actions and your lifestyle does not change, it's as absurd, as silly, as ridiculous as going to a mirror, looking at it, walking away, and wondering who was in that piece of glass. It's that just ridiculous. It shouldn't make sense because neither does hearing the word of God and not responding to it. Thank you. I agree. I'm looking for something, but there's times that it's just true. That this doesn't transform us. It's not that the word isn't impactful. It's that we are either blind or deaf or both, or we become so hardened, so resistant to hope that we misunderstand the gospel. It's intentionally absurd. And like I said, he's not saying the word is a mirror. He's saying it's absurd to do this while claiming you are. We don't, church, get to effectively rewrite the Bible, leaving out or reinterpreting it to fit what we want. I don't care what side of the aisle politically you are on. It literally doesn't matter. All sides are doing this. Grabbing so-called Jesus and making him look like these so-called ideologies. Jesus is love, so he accepts literally everything. Jesus is strong, so he's going to fight for these things. Both reinterpreting the actual gospel. But we don't get to do this even when it's hard. Even when it means you and I cannot react the way we want in the moment. If we are children of God, then we have to read, we have to interpret and apply the word. And this sometimes is hard. This sometimes requires people who have been doing it for 25 years and have been doing groups through COVID, and they saw the worst. People who have been alive long enough to have lived through the whole civil rights movement and so many other things. How about people who have studied history and are really working on how we respond to things, how we react to things? Understanding what it says, taking the time to not react to it simply because of a YouTube video. A random preacher who has some charisma to him. And honestly, if I'm ever that, then ignore me too. We don't get to act like petty things. When James reminds us we were created as his pinnacle thing. He then mentions the perfect law. And we've been trying to correct this idea. It's not, the translation is correct. The word is law. But the word in Hebrew means instruction. It means teaching how to live. It's guiding us what is good. It's guiding us away from the things that are not of God, that are not the things. And when we look to the perfect law, the perfect instruction, the perfect direction giver, this isn't a mirror, but it is something that reflects the light of God onto us. We look into a mirror to see ourselves, and I'm going to metaphorically say what the word, this perfect law, does is looks at you. It reveals God, and it shows an example then through Jesus, and it sets us up next to it and saying, are we matching up? Or am I placing me first and Jesus next and saying Jesus is right insofar as he agrees with me? Insofar as he agrees with my political party, insofar as he agrees with the pain I have experienced and now interpreting into action. Or am I saying Jesus first? How do I deal with my pain? How do I deal with my politics? Jesus first, how do I deal with my relationships, my marriages, my friendships? We talk a lot about my driving. How does it do it? And what does the perfect law do? It sets us free. If we do what it says. The second thing James points out is, I'm going to summarize into control yourself. Control yourself. And he writes in verse 26, if you claim to be religious, remember, not just running through steps in religion, but instead, if you claim to be someone who is pursuing a life with God, who's genuinely trying to connect with God, letting God direct your life. If you claim to be this, but don't control your tongue, you're fooling yourself, and your claim to religion is worthless. A bad read of this. It doesn't mean that it's a terrible read. It's just not the point of what he's saying. But what I'll call a bad read is to read this as James is saying, don't cuss. This isn't what he's saying. To minimize what he's saying down to that is like looking in a mirror and walking away and forgetting what you look like. Am I endorsing cussing? No. This isn't an either or. James is using an example to try and get us to understand something, that this is about self-control. The specific example is control of your mouth. When things are in high pressure, you're angry, you feel wronged, or your video game didn't go right. Or Curry blows his knee, or Tatum his Achilles. Good, finally, response. My wife will be here in second service, and she'll have a visceral reaction to the story I'm getting ready to tell, because she's still upset about it. We met in 7th grade, by the way, started dating in sophomore year of high school. Like I've said before, she was infatuated with me from the start. That's going to be my joke forever. It has been forever, yeah. Anyway. But I think it was a year after sophomore school, so getting ready to be in junior, and that summer, my foster mom and I had an interesting relationship. We both yelled a lot, but I was convinced apparently that I shouldn't have any limits or whatever, but I wasn't. Anyway, we have this, let's call it a conversation between my mom and I, and she said something, I said something, and she said, "You're grounded." Anyone ever get grounded? And so my mom should have gone pro in grounding. I would hear about kids or parents that they ground them and then the parent forgets so the kid can still do whatever, and that wasn't my life. My mom had like a well-developed out strategy for grounding. You began in your room, When she felt like it, you then could move to in the house, but no TV. For the younger ones, there was no internet. Everything was black and white. That part's a joke, but there was no internet. So TV was really no video games or anything like that. The next stage was you could watch TV, again, just based on whim, when she decided you weren't evil, I'm guessing. That's over. I'm just making fun of it. But the next stage was you could go outside also, but if anyone came over, you had to come back inside. I told you this is well developed. Developed enough that this many years later, I can still tell you what the steps are. The next stage was the only reason you could go out of the yard was to go to school, and you needed to come immediately back home. So the next stage was you could be in the yard and people could come over so we could play basketball, but you still couldn't go out of the yard. And then next, finally, you were done being grounded. So the first thing, she says, you want to be grounded, or you're grounded. And I said, okay. And she goes, great, you're grounded for 2 weeks then. I said, fine. Something like that. Like, fine. And she said something like, do you want more? And I said, because I'm brilliant and always have been, not led by my emotions primarily, I said, why not? You're going to do it anyway. So I was grounded all summer. This meant that my new girlfriend and I could not see each other or talk on the phone, because I was also grounded from the phone, for the entire summer. My wife's reaction then is because she's still mad about that summer. Your question should be, why did she stay with me? So listen, some of you are with me here. When it comes to anger and temper, y'all go from 0 to prison. That isn't my joke. I genuinely can't remember where I heard it, but it just fits. And I feel like I need the site until. But to talk about pressure for James, we talked about that, but what about some of the pressures for today? A sense that evil is winning. Feelings that things aren't fair, we need justice. Questions about blessings. Why aren't things better? Where is God? We need to tell the people of God they need to stand up and stand up for righteousness. And who's telling the truth? These are pressures. I'm not going to answer them all today. To a degree, I can't. These are tough. They're felt. I'm not mocking them. I'm telling you, you're not unique in that you're feeling some of these pressures. Add to the individual pressures that you have. And these things are hard. And how are we tempted to act? And these are broad. It's a big paintbrush I'm using, but you'll get it. I think we're tempted to lash out. But listen, some of us are responding to life like we're 4-year-olds who hit because they hit me first. It's okay to talk about the abortion people like this because they did this. I know you want it to be. But what if your religion's worthless? Another version is a vigilante justice. Remember the story about Cain Velasquez I told you? And listen, that story is so horrific. It hits on child abuse at a level. Please don't hear me as overstating anything or over judging or just anything negative. I'm simply using it as an illustration. That type of pain is not something I'm trying to play with, but I am using it as an illustration because I think I want it to be something that really does have a feel to it. But Cain's action, they make sense to me. I'm even tempted to consider what he did as right. How are you supposed to respond to that? But listen, they don't take into account anything other than his pain in the moment. Again, I'm not judging. I'm not there. I don't know him. I know nothing. I'm simply saying objectively from way far away and used as a lesson here. They don't take into account anything other than his pain in the moment. And they don't take into account the unrelated and even innocent people that were exposed to harm by his response. And listen, are our aggressive words and attacks against the things we are threatened by and we think are unjust and incorrect and evil, are our attacks against those any different? Even if we claim to be right. Let me ask, does being right give free license to cause harm? Next, James says, don't fool yourself. How you think and act matters, guys. Let me give you a hint on logic, an area that I'm decent at. And if your logic is weak about your ethical standards, it's pretty simple. If something is done by you, it's okay. But if that same thing is done to you, it's wrong. This is hard to figure out if you're actually doing it, but I'm saying that is incorrect logic. If the standard you apply only applies to everybody else, but it's okay for you to lose your cool and to say things no one should say because they made you upset, or I'm upset, or this happened. There are times that horrific things happen and it's understandable, but the idea is that good friends then come and help calm down. And in those moments, but it still doesn't mean you're not responsible. That you don't have to answer for what you've said and done. For example, some of us are fighting abortion by using dehumanizing language or endorsing it or liking it or whatever against opponents while claiming that abortionists are attacking the image of God. Do you understand what I just said? We're using our responses to people as if they're not people, while claiming that they're killing people. We are removing humanity while saying that the reason that what they're doing is wrong is the removal of humanity. This isn't right. I'm not saying that this other issue is wrong or is right. I'm saying wrong doesn't make any response right. Our religion becomes worthless when we don't allow the genuine gospel of hope to integrate even when we're upset. The challenge that he gives us then is remember whose you are. Not just who you are, whose you are. We talked about identity. We belong to God first, and you represent more than yourself. Bring your righteous indignation back to the mirror, the perfect instruction of God, and humbly see if what you and I are preaching so vehemently is the same of what Jesus actually did preach. What if instead of just the tables being flipped, you actually figured out what that was about, and you included the Beatitudes and this whole Sermon on the Mount, and you understood why he was actually upset, and that it wasn't a reaction. Finally, how Jesus revolutionaries, not just revolutionaries, but Jesus revolutionaries are to act. James 1:26, pure and genuine religion in the sight of God the Father means caring for orphans and widows in their distress and refusing to let the world corrupt you. What he's giving here, guys, is an example of what for him is a bare minimum of responding correctly to the Bible's instruction. Literally, orphans and widows, yes, those without a family, but also orphans and widows as a category, those with no voice, those with less power, those without a name. Psalm 68:6, God places the lonely in families, and he sets prisoners free and gives them joy. That we never remove our ability to accept the hopeless. That we never present such an angry front such a blind and deaf point of view that those who need the hope most are afraid of us. Those who are a part of the family. We talk about evangelism. My version is those who are a part of the family. They just don't know it yet. They're chained up and need freedom. And sometimes we're worried about what they used to do and what they're currently doing and what drugs they're doing and how they've marked up their skin or whatever else. We become more open to it. Apparently a preacher can have a sleeve and be okay. Conclusion as we end here. James is not a pretty, empty-headed letter saying, I'm okay, you're okay. This silly little statement about how to float through life on a grace cloud that is unaffected by the world. James is gritty and honest and uncompromising about the real law of God, the one that brings freedom, the one where freedom is used to become agents of rightness. I'm trying to move away from the word righteousness because it's been made gross for me. And because the word means rightness. You don't have to change. Righteousness is still the correct word. Just why I say it, rightness. And because God has freed us to be those agents. Not just agents that walk around and go, you're doing it wrong, you're doing it wrong, you're doing it wrong. But those who are looking for people who need hope and are open to receiving it. But to do that, we have to deal with the pressure that's coming from all sides. So what should we intentionally think? Let me ask, how should a 4-year-old act when she has a toy taken from her? Not how she does, but what are you an instructor? You're trying to bring some self-control, some awareness all over. It's how we teach 4-year-olds. This is just what's necessary. We're born just mine, or we learn mine. Maybe both. But how about Cain Velasquez? Should Cain have he acted that way? Does it change when the cause for action is so evil? James isn't challenging us to give up what we're passionate about, church. He's not saying turn a blind eye to things that are wrong or unrighteous or unjust. He's not saying that at all. He's not endorsing becoming soft, weak people who just, there's nothing to you. Justice in the Bible is a vital issue. But what if your response to injustice is itself unjust? What if your reaction to evil is itself evil? What if your anger is causing you to forget what you should look like? We're being challenged to move away from the abusive problem-solving techniques that created the very problems you and I are reacting to. Gandhi learned this from reading the gospel. And Reverend Martin Luther King understood this. The evil will expose itself as utterly evil and completely unreasonable. We must not use the tools of oppression to stop oppression, or you and I become the oppressor. The entire history of mainstream Christianity honestly has refused this lesson. As if God's whole Jesus plan needed help, we have framed the church's role to be the keepers of holiness and so-called right action. And then our own narratives, our own personal stories and group identifications as us being the heroes of faith because we are the ones brave enough to stand up. But what should we intentionally think? Let me push against all that and say I think the rebellion that's needed, the fight, the power that needs fought, is one against our own tendency to hit back. Micah 6:8. Know, O people, the Lord has told you what is good, and this is what he requires of you, to do what is right, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. James is telling us that we can, even under pressure, experience joy so profound that we become givers of that joy. It overflows. And that we can see outside pressures as temptations to let that hope fade away. But God's plan is that we lean into hope so significantly that we hear Micah 6:8 and go, well, yeah, of course that's what we do. That's who we are. What should we intentionally say? My daughter-in-law, her name is Mariah, posted this week. And she wrote, I believe in standing for truth, not the kind that shames others while claiming to love them. There's a difference between righteousness and self-righteousness. One moves with quiet conviction and compassion, and the other demands a spotlight and calls it holy. It's easy to weaponize faith when you're more concerned with being right than being kind. But the gospel is never about public takedowns or moral superiority. It's about mercy. It's about humility, about grace that meets people where they are, not a grace that comes with a list of conditions and a public platform. When spiritual language is used to manipulate, control, or tear others down, it stops being about truth and becomes about ego. If the way you and I live out your faith pushes people away while making you feel more righteous in the process, then it's not Christ you're honoring, it's yourself. If you're always the hero of your own holiness, you may have missed the point entirely. What should we intentionally say? In the face, I hope that cuts us. In the face of this, what I want to say is I will offer hope. I will disagree with what should be disagreed with, and I will find a way to be fully human, fully God's, while I refuse to accept what is wrong. What will I intentionally do as we close? Do what is right. It's a big category. I can't tell you everything is right. But listen to me very carefully. As somebody who had a lot done wrong as a kid, do what is right, even when things haven't been done right to and for you. Rise up. Rise up. Fight against that temptation to be the evil that has hurt you. I know it's hard. Oh my gosh, it's so hard. But you can do this because God has said we can. Let's stand as we close here. I'll end with this. Fight the power of fear, hate, self-righteousness, and control your anger, and control your mouth, control what you write. The things we do impact more than just us. Let's pray. I love you, God. Your word humbles me, it humbles us. I don't believe that I came or you came to scold, but instead instruct. Give us hope. Remind us about this hope so that we can see and understand that our mission is to love people. You bring correction, God. Teach us how to do all of this. With great humility, we come before you and say we're sorry for hurting people that you love. Help us make it our mission to respond to people in the way that you have responded to us. In Jesus' name. Church, say amen. God bless you guys. Have a great week. We'll see you next week.